Project Configuration, Implementing Switch Port Security. By the time you're done here, you will be able to set up port security standards in your switch environment. This video almost didn't exist. And the reason why is because I built this entire series for you to be able to walk into just about any business environment and roll out a switch infrastructure with the core of what you needed. And it has been so hard because I'm like, I want to talk about this. And I'm like, no, that's not core. For example, VLANs. Every video I have struggled because I want so much to talk about VLANs. But I had decided to move that to a completely different series to keep you focused, again, on the core of what you needed. And I had already decided to do the same thing when it came to security. Because when I thought about security, I immediately thought, I need to tell them to change their passwords. And I need to tell them to use long passwords and complex passwords. And I'm like, that's so lame. They already know that. And I don't want to open the whole door into the security realm, just like I would if I moved into VLANs. And then I stumbled on this clip art, going through the CBT Nuggets clip art collection. We have our own clip art that we use that are drawn by our amazing artists behind the scene. And my mind went back to a specific situation where this guy was me. I'm going to spare myself the details of what happened because it was kind of embarrassing. Needless to say, that hammer came down on my head so hard, I was like, oh man, I don't want to make that mistake again. And thus, I decided to introduce one security nugget into this series called the Port Security Standard for Every Network. So what is port security? Well, simply put, it's the ability to control what or how many of something plug into every single port of your switch. Now we know we have these switches and they have a whole bunch of ports that connect to the patch panel, and that patch panel goes to all the different wall jacks in our environment. And it's at that point that our user can plug stuff into it. Now stop right there with that statement. Our user can plug stuff into it. That introduces an element of risk. See, when it comes to security, there are those evil, malicious people out there that are trying to break into your network. But if you were to look at some kind of cosmic scale of evil people compared to ignorant people, there are far more ignorant people than there are evil people. And I say ignorant with all the love in my heart because I wouldn't expect everybody to know everything about computers and networking. Otherwise, none of us would have jobs, right? I myself am ignorant towards cars. When my car breaks down, I open that hood and I play that man role with the best of them. I grunt and I stare at things, but I have no idea what's under there. I am ignorant when it comes to cars. And if I take my hand and start reaching inside of there, I'm probably going to break something worse than it already is. Because my car ignorance makes me somewhat dangerous. Now, in the case of my car, I only impact myself. But in the case of the network, the ignorant person can impact the entire company. For example, let's just say somebody brought their wireless access point from home and plugged it in at their desk. Now you and I might say, well, why on earth would somebody do that? I would tell you a whole variety of reasons that they would do that. Because I like my wireless access point. Because I get a weak wireless signal in this corner of the building. My point is, it happens. And let's just say that person knows very little about wireless security and just broadcasts your company network into the parking lot. And sitting in the parking lot is some evil people. And from their car, they attach to your network and start siphoning off all of the files and folders and anything else they can access in your environment. So port security really does two things to prevent this. One, I can restrict the number of MAC addresses allowed on every single one of the switch, as well as restricting what MAC addresses are allowed on every port of that switch. And that leads me to my second question right here. What type of restrictions should exist? My advice is every network should have a restriction on the number of MAC addresses per port, at least as it relates to the ports exposed to your users. A few organizations, and I would say they're the more high security organizations, would really care about what plugged into that port. For example, I worked with the police department out here in Phoenix, and they literally locked down every port to where if this is Mike, they set only Mike's MAC address, or I should say the MAC address of his computer, as the MAC address allowed to connect to that port. If anything else connects to that port, it will shut the port down. And that's what port security is all about. So here's what I want to do. This is a map of suite number 4. We actually drew this when we did the original IT Expert cabling series. And this is where I'm talking to you right now in this CBT Nuggets room. I'd love to take a walk with you down this hallway down to the storage room and find a port somewhere in this room. I'm sure one of the walls have one. To do a proof of concept, I want to set up port security in a test environment before we roll it out to every port in this organization to make sure it does what we think it will and it won't break something. So let's go. All right, well, I'm sitting next to port 109 that has both a blue and an orange port on here. And I brought with me a Linksys 5-port switch, which it's kind of fun. You turn it around and it has 6 ports. It's because this was manufactured in an era where it really mattered whether you had straight through or crossover connections. So they actually labeled, I don't know if you can see that, port number 5, it's kind of linked together with this thing called uplink, which does a crossover cable, because technically you're supposed to use a crossover cable when connecting a switch through the wall to another switch. Nowadays, we have a feature called Auto MDIX that takes care of that for most cases, but it's still good to know, straight through versus crossover. So I'm going to plug this guy into the wall, get some electricity on there. I brought an Ethernet cable. It's a terrible habit, but I hate untying things. It looks so pretty. So I'll just kind of plug it in there. We'll plug it into port number 1 and just let it dangle from the wall there. Sure enough, we've got activity on port number 1, so we have an active link. Now, I actually brought 2 laptops with me, the Microsoft Surface Book and the MacBook Pro. I always keep them apart because they start fighting if you sit them too close to each other. So I'm going to take my Surface Book right here, and let's get it a USB to Ethernet connection, which I've got sitting around here somewhere. There we go. And we'll get it connected to the switch. There we go. We've got device number 1 connected. And I'll take this MacBook Pro, get my Thunderbird to Ethernet adapter, and plug in device number 2. Now, I haven't set up any security as of yet at all. So we'll connect this guy over here to port number 3, jack him in. So now I actually have 3 active connections, one going from the switch to the wall, and then the 2 laptops that are connected there. So 2 active MAC addresses, because this guy, I'm sure, doesn't have a MAC address. It's a small, dumb switch, meaning it has no intelligence in it whatsoever. I'm going to go on the Surface Book and open a command prompt and do an ipconfig/all, simply so I can get the MAC address of the USB to Ethernet adapter here, so I can find out what port this connects to on the switch. Once again, I'm back to the we should have documented this whole thing from the beginning, but nonetheless, we'll do that right now. There's our little USB to Ethernet adapter, and there's our MAC address. So I headed back to my office so I can telnet into one of the Suite 4 switches. I'm going to start off with this .242. Seems as good a place to start as any. 10.225.1.242. Log in. Let's find out where my laptop is at. Show MAC address table, and we'll look at a specific MAC address. I'll hit the question mark, and it's saying, well, go ahead and type it in whatever format you want. Well, I wrote it down on this piece of paper right here, 0050B60E6A-7C. Nice. We've got that sitting there on Gigabit Ethernet 17. I'm immediately going to bring over my network documentation spreadsheet, and there's my RT Suite 4 Switch 1. Insert a line in there. Keep the formatting as below. Copy and paste. And we now know that Gigabit 17 connects to the wall jack 109-B for blue, just like we had down here. That's the port that I plugged into. And for now, I'll just type in storage room, east wall. Good. Our network documentation grows. I'm going to come back to my command prompt and type in the command show MAC address table, and let's look at the interface GI17. That's the interface that we just discovered my Surface Book MAC address underneath. And you can see down here, in addition to my Surface Book, I see my MacBook Pro MAC address. So there's the 2 MAC addresses that I'm looking for. Now, before we start implementing port security, I'm going to come in here and unplug this cable from the wall so we don't have any false starts. Meaning, I don't want to trigger a port security violation before we're ready. All right, now that we have that cable unplugged, let's just telnet in and make sure our MAC addresses are indeed cleared out of there. Telnet into the switch, log in. If I could type that password right. Good. I'm going to do a quick show interface status. Great command to show what ports are actually plugged in and active on the switch. And there's that GI17, and I can see it is currently down because we unplugged that cable just for grins, and so we've got the command circling our brain. I'll do a show MAC address table, and we'll do interface GI17, and we should see nothing there. Okay, good. I'm going to shoot over to the graphic interface. I've already got the logged out screen for that switch. I'll type in the username and the password and get logged in. And what are we talking about now? We're talking about port security. So I'm going to head over on the left side when it appears to the security section and drop down to this port security. Now what I'm going to see is a list of all of the different ports that are available to me and their current port security status. I see the interface status is currently unlocked. The learning mode, classic lock, trap disabled. And you see some other columns here that are just blanked out. What does this mean? Well, let's first off hit the interface that we're interested in. We'll go on edit. Now, when we do that, we see a whole bunch of options that are available to us. First off, the interface status. Now, I see a checkbox there that says lock, meaning, do you want port security on this or not? Now, this is a really deceiving thing because when I hear lock, I think of, well, the interface is locked. That means it's locked down or something like that, like it's shut down or something. That's actually not what it means here. That checkbox essentially says, is port security turned on? So what I'm going to do is check the box and say, why, yes, it is. Now, by default, I have this option selected that is classic lock. Now that option is really lame because it literally just locks the port, meaning the port is immediately disabled no matter how many devices you have plugged in. Now you might say, well, what's the point of that? Well, maybe you implement a security policy in your organization that says every port that doesn't have devices plugged in is automatically locked, and then I move it to a different security option as devices connect. So if you look, we really have 3 options for our learning mode, and then we have 3 things that we can do if that learning mode is violated. First off is my personal favorite, the limited dynamic lock. This one simply says, I only want a certain number of addresses assigned to that port. It doesn't really matter what those MAC addresses are. That's why it has the word dynamic here. It's kind of like, you know what? Swap those MAC addresses in and out, plug in whatever devices you want. I don't care as long as you don't exceed this number of addresses. Now in our example, I'm actually going to leave that at 1 because I only have 2 laptops back there. So what I want to do is plug in one, make sure it's all working, then plug in the second one and then see if the violation occurs. So this is where we have our selection of what do you want to do if somebody does violate that one dynamic MAC address? Well, you have 3 options: discard, forward, or shut down. Discard simply means that if you exceed it, it's going to ignore whatever other MAC addresses are trying to access that port. So, for example, if I plugged in my Microsoft Surface Book, that would be the first MAC address learned, and that would be the only one allowed to communicate on there. Once I plug in the MacBook Pro, it will be discarded because it's the second MAC address, which exceeds the 1, right? You also have the option of forward, which pretty much says, violate me all day. Just put whatever MAC address is on there. The reason that they give you that option is because maybe you're going to send a trap message when it occurs, meaning a notification to your monitoring server saying, hey, the port in the storage room is exceeding the number of devices that you have. You don't want to disable anything. You don't want to limit productivity, but you do want to know that it's happening. That's what that trap checkbox does, by the way. And setting up network monitoring is something we're going to do in a whole nother series that's going to be awesome. The last one is what gives IT people the reputation of being mean. We're going to shut your port down, meaning it's actually going to put it into a suspended status. And that means you or I are going to have to intervene to turn that port back on. Now, the other 2 options that you have there is secure permanent and secure delete on reset. Secure permanent means whatever MAC addresses are on there now will be the only MAC addresses that are allowed forevermore. It's not dynamic, like I can change what devices are attached. This is, I only want that MacBook Pro and I only want that Surface Book attached, and I'm learning those MAC addresses as the permanent MAC addresses on those ports. Whereas the secure delete on reset means if I reboot the switch, it will clear out the MAC addresses and relearn whatever new MAC addresses are there. That's kind of handy because if you have a cubicle shift or office moves and all that kind of stuff, you can just reboot your switch at the end of the day. It'll forget the old MAC addresses and learn the new ones, and those are the only ones that are allowed until the switch is rebooted again. So I'm going to set ourselves up for a limited dynamic lock, 1 MAC address max. Apply. Oh, this is such a silly thing. I've seen this on this series of Switch. They're saying, hey, please unlock the interface before changing the learning mode. So I'm going to unlock it, apply it, then I'm going to lock it again once it refreshes. There we go. I'm going to say, okay, now it's locked, which means it's enabled, and apply it again. That's really Cisco's way of kind of tap dancing around the way that you type these commands in from the command line. You have to do it in a certain order. So really the graphic interface is forcing you to kind of do that in order. It just seems kind of hokey. Like unlock it, change the mode, lock it again. So when I close this window out, I see behind the scenes I've got this locked port on a limited dynamic lock, and the action on violation will be shut down, one MAC address allowed. So now let's go see if we can break something. All right, well, I'm going to plop down here. I still got my switch blinking away. You can see that I actually still have two devices connected. That's port 2 and 3, which is the MacBook and the Surface Book. My port 1 is still unplugged from the wall. And before I plug it in, I'm actually going to unplug the MacBook Pro so I just have one device, because I want to make sure that port security is doing what it's supposed to do and not just shutting down for no good reason. So I'll plug it into the blue port here. There we go, if I could get that. There we go. I now see port 1 is online, blinking away, and seems like life is good. I'm going to grab my Surface Book over here, and I've got the command prompt up and running. Let's just do a ipconfig /renew. Make sure it can get an IP address. All right, there we go. So we've got, looks like the Ethernet 7, which if I do an ipconfig /all, got a lot of adapters on this thing. Ethernet 7 is my USB to Ethernet adapter. You can see that right there. I've got an IP address. Let's just do a continual ping 4.2.2.2-T, which just means keep it going, keep it going. All right. So now I'm going to take my little switch here, get my MacBook Pro. I'm going to plug this guy in. Let's see what happens. I've now got Oh, that was awesome. Now, I'm not looking at the switch telnet prompt. I've got that recording back there, but I don't know if you can see that, but port 1 just went down. I'm looking over here at my, look at this. Look at this. The pings right here immediately dropped. It says request timed out. We are dead in the water because port security has done its thing. Oh man, my telnet connection timed out. That's all right. We can check the log files. Let's get back in there and I'll do my login, show log. Excellent. Right here. Take a look right here. Linked down, GI17 aggregated. Ooh, I need to set the date and time on this thing too. So it's showing linked down, and then right after that it says port suspended, port GI17 suspended by port security. All right, check this out. Hang on, I'm going to do a show, let's do interface status. And yeah, looks like GI17 is down. Look at that little asterisk next to it. Let's hit the space bar. And look at that asterisk. The interface was suspended by the system. So sure enough, you can see that GI17 was suspended because it had a port security violation. Port security did exactly what it was supposed to do as soon as it saw that second MAC address come in there. All right, now we're stuck. How do we get that thing back up? Well, I'll say on this series of switch, it's actually a little tricky command, and I took a little Googling to find it. From privilege mode, you type in set interface active, and then whichever one you want to power back on. So I'll type in GI17, and now you can see the link has gone back up. Now, I didn't disable any of the port security, but when I did walk out of the room, I closed the lids of my laptops. So right now, I think we're safe. If I do a show MAC address, interface, GI17, there's probably nothing there. Yeah, because my laptops are closed. But if they were open and I reactivated it, it would be only a matter of seconds before it'd go boom and knock it back down again because we'd have another port security violation. So our proof of concept, successful. But keep in mind, practically speaking, all we've done is enable port security on gigabit Ethernet 17, which goes to the east wall of the storage room where we did our little proof of concept. We now have to take that configuration and apply it to all the switches in our organization. But what mindset should we use to do that? The quick yet completely devastating approach would be to come back to the switch and take that proof of concept port that we had, that GI17, and say, okay, well, let's copy those settings to GE1 through GE28. You'll see on different switches they use GI or GE at different places. Consistently inconsistent, you might say. And what that would do is apply that one MAC address restriction to every single port. Or maybe your organization uses two. Now, why would that be devastating? Well, because I'm sure there's many places where we have multiple MAC addresses, like for instance, our uplink ports, right? As soon as that setting gets applied to the uplink ports, it's going to say, okay, max of 2 MAC addresses, and it sees the hundreds potentially coming in here. It's like, shut that port down, violation, violation. So by going the fast route, you cause a complete network outage. Instead, it's going to take a little analysis. Our network diagram is a great start because we immediately see the ports that we want to protect because we know multiple MAC addresses are coming in there. But if it were me, and let me close out of this window right here. No, I don't want to apply those changes. What I would do is I would go to the MAC address tables on this switch, and let's go straight to the dynamic MAC addresses. We'll sort it by interface. And so what it does is organize this by interface. Now, we haven't talked about VLANs. I've told you many times it's another series. But for now, take a look at this port. So I see Gigabit Ethernet 3 has 3 MAC addresses under it. Makes me go, I wonder what's there. So I would want to trace down that port and find out what's going on, that it's already violating our MAC address policy by having 3. Maybe it's a good reason. I see GE6 has a couple MAC addresses under there, GE7, so they're getting in just fine. And as we'd expect, GE28, which is our uplink port to the other switches, has a whole bunch of them, not to mention the lag interface. So if I were applying it to this switch, I'd come over here to this port security, modify my template so that I'm allowing 2 MAC addresses. We'll apply that, then relock it. Gotta love the finicky ways. Then I would go in and copy those settings to every single one of those ports that didn't violate the policy. For example, GE1 to GE2. Now I remember GE3 violated it. So then we'll say GE4 through GE27. Boom. Now I've got to say my stomach kind of nodded when I did that because I'm kind of doing it on the fly. I still don't feel good. I should have, wrote down all of those ports just because I'm going off the top of my head and I'm expecting somebody to bang on my door at any moment saying, "What's going on?" Just for my own sanity, I'm going to telnet in there and do a show interface status. Oh good, no downs with asterisks next to it, so no apologies to make yet. But that's the approach that I would take, and then apply that to every single one of these switches one at a time. Send out the email notifying the organization of the policy, and that way people know what will happen if they violate it. Now, I told you at the beginning of this nugget that you will be able to set up port security standards in your switch environment. So here's what I want you to do. Implement port security with a 2 MAC address limit on the appropriate ports of all the switches in your environment. Then validate that port security is functional by causing a violation in the network and ensure that your switches smack it down. It's not good enough to theorize that port security is working. You got to see it for yourself. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.